Hello, welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 3, Advanced Certificate in Procurement and Supply Operations, and this is Module 6, Socially Responsible Warehousing and Distribution. I'm going to cover Learning Outcome 4, which is to understand the environmental impacts of warehousing and distribution. If you're looking for Learning Outcomes 1 and 2, please look at the slide deck for Level 3, Module 5, Learning Outcomes 1 and 2, because they're the same. So can you think of some of the impacts that global logistics might have? Consider the resources required for transporting and storing goods and the impact on the environment, and then contrast that to your local suppliers. So global logistics networks have put increasing pressure on resources and the environment. So prioritising green logistics can help to minimise the damage that's caused. And then we've got green warehousing. When you're looking at green warehousing, you need to think about the energy efficiency of that warehouse, such as the temperature, lighting, and the equipment that you're using. Then think about green energy sources, which can come from things like biomass, wind and solar power, waste incineration, kinetic energy, hydroelectric, and geothermal. And then your warehouse needs to be built to a sustainable standard. And energy consumption standards for setting good practices include things like BREEAM, which is in the UK, LEED in USA, CASPI in Japan, and Green Star in Australia. So what factors determine what the optimum warehouse temperature is? And what do you think influences the material handling equipment that's being used? And in terms of the green energy sources, what factors influence the source that's being selected? If you're using hydroelectric, you're going to need to be near a water source. And solar power and wind power will also depend on the location of the building. But then also, what are the costs involved and how long would it take to get a return on investment? So go off and find some industry examples. Look at IKEA, for example, because they installed some photovoltaic panels to use more green sources and reduce energy consumption in their warehouses. Now, organisations can come under pressure from consumers, government and activists. The consumers and general public in general are becoming far more aware of environmental issues and activities that contribute towards climate change. They're concerned with the social and environmental impacts of globalisation and the transportation of goods, how it impacts them, society, and the environment. It includes issues around air quality, marine pollution, solid waste and landfills, toxicity, and the use of pesticides, water quality, and deforestation. So when planning new warehouses, you need to consider the impact it's going to have on the public, such as increased traffic, change road layouts, increased emissions from that transport, as well as visual and noise pollution. Permission can be denied as a result of public consultation, so it's important to consider the impact on them and include public consultation in your plans. Let's now talk about the government. The government encourage environmentally responsible actions by specifying standards through legislation, such as acceptable levels of carbon emissions. Organisations must follow the government's environmental regulations or face legal or financial penalties, with the potential threat of dismissal from the market. Pressure groups and activists include examples like Greenpeace and the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, Oxfam and Amnesty International. They seek to ensure that businesses operate in an ethical and sustainable way and use publicity campaigns and social media to raise awareness of poor environmental practices, while also lobbying businesses directly. So have a look at a pressure group that you're aware of and find out about one or more of their campaigns they've run recently. What was it about? What is it hoping to achieve? Was it prompted by a specific activity? And what organisation or industry was it aimed at? Has anything happened as a result? In terms of international legislation and agreement, environmental sustainability is promoted at different levels. At national level, which is environmental legislation, international level, which is environmental agreements that holds countries to shared standards to ensure that the competitive advantage isn't achieved at the expense of poor environmental practice. This forms part of the sort of United Nations Global Compact. And it's worth noting that the World Trade Organization facilitates free trade. And if any health, environmental, enforcement or conservation measures were found to be in conflict with the World Trade Organization trade rules, then they would prioritize the protection of the environment over free trade. So I would again encourage you to do some research on the UN Global Compact and the World Trade Organization, as well as GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and the GATS, which is the General Agreement on Trade in Services. So how can an organisation find out what impact their warehouse and distribution is having on the environment? They can do this by calculating their carbon footprint. The carbon footprint measures the total greenhouse gas emissions caused directly or indirectly by people and organisations. It considers the output of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. Sources that contribute to a warehouse carbon footprint will include the transport it uses, as well as the energy used from heating, cooling, and insulation, the materials handling and other equipment, conveyor belts, and waste management. So to calculate your carbon footprint, you need to select the measurement method and be consistent. Be clear about what parts of your organisation is included and consider how easy or difficult it might be to collect that accurate data. Then collect the data and identify and explain any gaps or assumptions that you might have made. Do the calculations and multiply activity by the greenhouse gas emission factors. You can use the calculator on the Carbon Trust website. And ask a credible third party to audit and verify your data before making it public. Take action to reduce your carbon footprint over time. Warehouses and stores have various impacts on the environment. Accidents and risks are the first to think about. We want to discuss various risks to employees, the building, the environment, and the local community that's associated with warehousing. In order to do that, you need to carry out a risk assessment to identify hazards that could potentially harm people or the buildings or the environment, and then put measures in place to try and reduce that risk. So what have we got on the slide? We've got things like fire and flooding, security, but also handling of dangerous substances, and lots of tips you can use in risk mitigation strategies. We've then got noise pollution, which is unwanted or excessive sounds that can have a detrimental effect on human health, as well as environmental quality. Specialist companies analyse and assess the noise pollution for new warehousing and distribution projects before planning permission is granted. And noise is measured in decibels. Visual intrusion is the visual impact of warehouse and distribution on the local community and its visitors. It's the extent of which the impact depends on the importance of the site. So, for example, if it's a World Heritage Site, they'll consider that impact being quite high. But if it's at home or leisure, then you have more frequency of exposure. Next is vibration, which is caused by rapid oscillating movements through mechanical vibrations. You can get something called hand-arm vibration, HAV, which is caused by using equipment that processes and transmits vibrations into your hand and arms. Long-term regular exposure to this hand-arm vibration can lead to something called vibration white finger or carpal tunnel syndrome. The other one is known as whole body vibration or WBV, and this is caused by vibrations being transmitted to your employee through the seat of their vehicle or the feet by their workplace machines and vehicles. And again, regular long-term exposure to this whole body vibration is very much linked to lower back pain. And the last thing to talk about in terms of the environmental impacts of your warehouse and stores is land take. And land take is the taking of land from suburban areas to be used for warehousing. And it includes the overall space taken up, including external access, parking, and the approach roads. Impact can be extensive, as a new warehouse can attract other parties into the supply chain to set up their operations nearby in order to reduce their transport costs. This clearly can affect the quality of life of the local community by creating physical barriers, increasing noise levels and generating odours, as well as reducing the urban aesthetics and destroying the heritage of the area. Can you think of an environmental impact that a new warehouse might have? Maybe the ecology of the area, less habitat for our wildlife, or what about impacts on the food chain? The EU Energy Performance of Buildings Directive came into force in the EU around 2006 as a measure to reduce the amount of carbon produced by buildings. The areas to consider when building a new warehouse include the energy efficiency and the use of renewable sources, including the use where possible of natural light and heat. Preventing pollution, reducing waste and increasing recycling. The transport efficiency, minimising the use of fossil fuels, with those vehicles consuming as well as the buildings. Water efficiency and conservation, and the use of low-impact, sustainably produced local materials to reduce resource consumption. And the efficient use of land with a low-maintenance design, retaining natural features and enhancing biodiversity where possible. Now, the cost of environmental damage that's caused by logistics can go across the social, ecological, and economic costs. The social costs are the impact to the public health, such as the impact of pollution and crop destruction, injuries and deaths resulting from traffic accidents, noise, visual intrusion, and congestion affecting passenger travel, the loss of greenfield sites and open spaces, as well as the deterioration of our infrastructures. Ecological cost is the impact on the environment and our ecosystems, such as greenhouse gases causing climate change. Again, the use of non-renewable fossil fuels and the effect of waste products such as tyres and oil, causing deconstruction to our ecosystems as well as the extinction of certain species. And the economic cost is the impact on an organisation's profit, which can also be affected through traffic congestion and resource waste. So greener methods of warehousing and logistics, such as minimising the miles products travel and reducing the packaging on products, can be introduced to reduce the environmental damage caused. And some organisations suggest that avoiding environmental damage leads to increased costs, whereas others say, such as using energy sources, has reduced their costs. Now, warehousing logistics rely on efficiency modes of transport to satisfy customer demands. The freight transportation, particularly road freight, such as heavy goods vehicles, has a significant impact on the environment. The government has encouraged both private and business vehicle operators to reduce CO2 emissions by offering incentives to adopt greener modes of transport. Methods include I guess, vehicles that you work on hydrogen or electricity. We've got trains and buses and bikes and all sorts of things. But it's all about enhancing the connectivity of rail, water or port, road and air systems in logistics hubs, encouraging new energy vehicles and cleaner technologies. The government in London have introduced low emission zones, enhancing vehicle emission standards nationally, and offering tax breaks for environmentally friendly vehicles such as electric cars. And also raising tax on diesel to generate extra revenue to reduce the appeal of buying diesel-run vehicles. There's also been the introducing of regulations on vehicle emissions to ensure that any new vehicles adhere to the minimum standards. And the local government can limit freight between set hours in specific locations. So what impact would enhancing the connectivity of rail, water, road and air systems have on an organisation? What impact do you think raising the tax on diesel would have? Also consider the wider supply chain here, because essentially you're just passing this increased cost onto the consumer rather than actually reducing the use of the diesel. And what initiative do you think is most likely to reduce vehicle emissions? Thanks for watching this session.